Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have something truly fascinating to share with you. A book that delves deep into India's educational history and presents a view of our country's past that many of us are unaware of. The book is The Beautiful Tree. Indigenous Indian Education in the 18th Century by Dharampal. But before I jump into the core of this remarkable book, I want to give a big shout out to one of my viewers, Chanda Shri Velankar, who suggested that I make a video about this book in my series on Indian education. Chanda Shri, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. Your recommendation was spot on, and I'm so glad that I took the time to read it. Thank you for sharing this insightful piece of history. And to all my viewers, remember your suggestions always mean the world to me. A book, like a seed, often grows from an idea nurtured by a moment that strikes deep into the heart. The story of the beautiful tree begins with a significant encounter, an event that echoes through history, reminding us of what was lost and what can be rebuilt. Now let's take a deeper look at an important moment in this story. The title of this book has been taken from the speech which Mahatma Gandhi had made at Chatham House, London on 20th October 1931. He had said, raising his concerns about the British impact on Indian education. He said, the British administrators, when they came to India, instead of taking hold of things as they were, began to root them out. They scratched the soil and began to look at the root and left the root like that, and the beautiful tree perished. By the way, this is from where the book got its title. To this, a British official named Sir Philip Hartog, a former British education officer, his reply was that they had probably let them die because they were so bad that they were not worth keeping. Hartog, in his role as the head of Education Commission, attempted to dismiss Gandhi's assertion that the British system of education was systematically eradicating India's rich educational heritage. In fact, Hartog demanded that Gandhi retract his statements, calling them baseless and unfair. But Gandhi, ever the determined leader, refused to back down. He knew what the British had done to India's education system had nothing to do with progress. It was about control. The British had intentionally designed a system that disregarded India's unique culture and needs. And this is where the story of the beautiful tree truly begins. Written by the historian and scholar Dr. Dharampal, this book was Gandhi's ally, providing the evidence he needed to support his allegations. Dr. Dharampal meticulously researched India's educational past, unveiling a picture that contradicted British claims. What he uncovered was shocking: an education system in India that was vast, inclusive, and far more advanced than what the British had led the world to believe. Through rigorous documentation, Dr. Dharampal proved that Indian education was vibrant and extensive, with well-established institutions long before the British arrived. It was an education rooted in the community, imparting knowledge that aligned with Indian values, much like a tree that grew from the soil of Indian society itself. In this video, we will trace the history, the challenges, and the stories that shaped this extraordinary educational system of India before and after the storm of colonialism. Join me as we rediscover what was once ours and how we can reclaim the beauty of education for future generations. Now, before the British took over, India already had an extensive and organized education system with schools spread across the villages. These schools were the bedrock of India's society, accessible to all children, regardless of caste, and provided education in a variety of subjects such as languages, math, science, and art. The knowledge imparted was practical and relevant to the needs of the rural life, focused on skills like farming, crafts, and moral education. In fact, Dharampal reveals that there were over 1 lakh schools across India in the 18th century, many of which were supported by local communities, and these schools offered education to children from various walks of life, including lower castes. Now, this is where it gets particularly interesting. While India had a well established education system, what was the situation like in England at the same time? Would you like to know that? In the 18th century, the state of education in England was far from ideal. Education was primarily for the privileged classes, those who could afford it. For the majority of the population in England, especially the poor and the rural folk, education was almost non-existent. While England was steadily advancing in industrialization, its education system was largely underdeveloped. Most children from the working class families in England worked instead of going to school. In fact, England's education system was rigid, exclusive, and inaccessible to a large portion of the population. The aristocracy and the elite were the only ones benefiting from the formal education. So Dharampal makes a compelling point. He says, the British colonial government in India, which failed to provide a solid education system for its own population, was now imposing an education system on India that was alien to its own culture and needs. And it is this contradiction that makes colonial educational policies even more disturbing. The British influence on Indian education was damaging. Before British rule, India had a rich educational system, deeply embedded in local traditions. But with the establishment of British colonial control, the education system was overhauled to serve the interest of the British Empire. Instead of nurturing local knowledge, the British introduced an education system which promoted Western ideals, language, and values, often at the expense of India's own rich heritage. The British believed that Indians needed to be civilized, which meant abandoning their native customs, languages, and educational practices in favor of the European models. This shift not only deprived the Indian population of a system that was in tune with their needs, but also left them dependent on colonial knowledge and ideologies. Dharampal shows us through his research that the Indian education system was dismantled systematically. Schools were closed down, teachers lost their jobs, the focus of education shifted from practical knowledge to serving the colonial agenda. This left large sections of Indian society, particularly from the marginalized caste, without access to meaningful education. As the British took control, the Indian education system started to lose its foundation. What was once a decentralized, community-driven system became increasingly centralized and disconnected from the needs of the local population. So to wrap up, The Beautiful Tree is not just a critique of British colonial rule, but a celebration of India's rich educational heritage. It calls attention to the fact that Indian education system was not just surviving, it was thriving before the British systematically undermined them. So thank you once again to Chandrashri for suggesting this incredible book. Your suggestion led me on an insightful journey into a hidden chapter of Indian history. I encourage you, all of you, to read it and reflect on the educational system we have today and how we can make it better by looking back at what it was once. I have shared the link to an open library where you can download this book and read it for free. I hope you liked the video. See you in my next one.